It is great to be back here at Rowan. I want to thank Dr. Hushman for his kind words, his great leadership at this university. And also, I always thought when I came back to Rowan for the first time, it would be the most exciting event of the week for Dr. Hushman, but I learned that it's not. I understand that he's father of the bride this week as well, and that'll obviously be a much bigger event than this one. Also, there are lots of folks out here to acknowledge Assemblyman Bob Auth, who I served with for 8 years in Trenton. And Bob, thank you for coming to Rowan tonight. But 2 other former elected officials. Now we're all in the club together. The former mayor of Camden, who I was fortunate enough to do a lot of really important work with over our 8 years where we served together. Thanks for being here tonight, Mayor Red. I appreciate it. And my South Jersey ambassador. When you come from North Jersey to South Jersey, you need an ambassador. You need someone to vouch for you, that you actually care about South Jersey, know where South Jersey is, understand that Trenton is not South Jersey, all of those things. And my South Jersey ambassador for the last 20 years has been the great former Speaker of the Assembly and South Jersey's greatest politician, Speaker Jack Collins. Thanks for coming tonight, Jack. I appreciate it. And let me apologize to all of you for being late. I left Morristown at 4 o'clock. Thought that'd be just fine to be here by 6:30, except it took me an hour and 45 minutes to get from Morristown to Woodbridge, which is not the normal course of things. So I apologize for being a few minutes late tonight. I know I gave Ben a heart attack, but he seems to have recovered, and let's be doing better. Now my topic tonight is supposed to be the future of the Republican Party. Now, that's a really broad topic. When Ben assigned that topic to me, he didn't tell me it was the future of the Republican Party in America, the future of the Republican Party in New Jersey, the future of the Republican Party at Rowan. We didn't get any specifics on it, just the future of the Republican Party. That's a real dangerous thing to have done, Ben, because that means, given it's that broad, I could talk about whatever the hell I want to talk about tonight. And that's exactly what I intend to do. What I hope to do for all of you tonight, before taking your questions, is to give you some context. Now, you may not have noticed, but I've been pretty quiet since January 16th of 2018. I've gotten lots of calls from my old colleagues wondering where I am and what I'm doing. They see me every once in a while, three Sundays a month or so. On This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They heard that I opened a law firm. They heard I'm doing things here and there, but I've been very quiet about what's going on in our state and the state of our Republican Party and the state of our state in New Jersey. I've always felt that it was important for me to give my successor some space, to give him some room to be able to set his own course, pick his own path, and be able to lead the state in the direction that he wants to lead them, given that he won the election in 2017, and he's earned the right to be able to do that. And I said that to a number of members of the press, that I was not going to be one of those guys who was sitting by the phone waiting to take calls from all of you. I think Dustin Raccioppi in particular can attest to that, who's called me any number of times, and I don't think I've ever called him back yet. Nope, see, so I told them I wouldn't, and I haven't. And so as I was considering when would I first start talking about these issues, I've gotten a number of different invitations to come to a number of different places. But when I got Ben's invitation to come here, I thought this is the opportunity for me to make my first comments about what's going on in the state and what that means for the Republican Party going forward. The first thing we need to do, I think, is to set some type of accurate historical context. Because as I've sat and listened, now, by the way, I've not spoken about my successor for 9 months. My successor can't stop talking about me. Other than Tammy, I'm the second most popular name that comes out of his mouth over the course of the last 9 months. And I've noted that, and also noted the kind of historical context that he's placed all this in. So I think it's time for us to come back and accurately reflect what's going on right now and what did go on before the current governor came here, and what that means for our party, for those of you who are Republicans, and for our state, for those of you who are New Jerseyans. I think for the future of our party, what we need to do is to boldly and directly and unashamedly talk about the differences in the results that our two parties have produced for this state when we've had the opportunity to lead the state. See, that's the closest you can come in politics to comparing apples to apples. You never can get exactly right because times are always a bit different. Circumstances that are beyond our control often affect us, whether that's the national economy or a natural disaster or a terrorist attack. But when you look at spaces of 8 years and 8 consecutive years, you can take a look at what happened in each of those 8 consecutive years, especially when they've come back to back. And I think you can get a pretty good feeling for what the leadership of each of those parties meant for the fortunes of the people in the state. And if Republicans are going to succeed in a state where they are grossly outnumbered, then they need to be bold and direct and unashamed to talk about what they believe in and what they believe in produced when they had the opportunity to lead. So I've heard a lot about New Jersey's economy, and I heard the governor give a speech a couple of weeks ago about his self-proclaimed bold plan to restore New Jersey's economy. This, of course, came as quite a shock to a whole bunch of people. Which people exactly? The 334,400 people who obtained private sector jobs in the 8 years before he came to office. They're shocked because they didn't know the economy needed to be revitalized. Because in the 8 years before I became governor, many of them, over 250,000 of them, had lost their jobs and weren't working. And in the 8 years since I became governor, 334,400 of them became employed in the private sector in the state. So it's interesting to place that in context. That in the 8 years where Jim McGreevey, Dick Cody, and John Corzine led the state, New Jersey lost 250,000 private sector jobs. In the 8 years that I led the state immediately thereafter, we gained 334,400 private sector jobs. Now, what else went on? We lowered business taxes during that time by $3 billion. Why is that important to mention in this context? Business can spend money on a number of different things, but in the main, they're spending it on one of two things. They're either paying their employees and investing in their company, or they're paying the government. Any business owner will tell you that most other expenses pale in comparison to those two expenses. So when you lower business taxes by $3 billion, that's $3 billion that you put into the hands of the men and women who own businesses, small, medium, and large in this state, and they can either keep the money for themselves, but what most of them do is invest in the long-term growth of their businesses, which means in further employment of the people of New Jersey. Now, what happened in the 8 years before we were here? Well, taxes went up significantly. Income taxes, sales taxes, corporate business taxes. We had income tax increases. We had income tax surcharges on top of the income tax increases. We had corporate tax increases and corporate tax surcharges that were all supposed to be temporary. But they continued to go up and up, and New Jersey's affordability continued to go down and down. And I would tell you that that's why in the 10 years before I became governor, 2001 to 2009, New Jersey was the only state in the union that had a jobless decade. Net zero private sector job growth. In the 8 years and now 9th year thereafter, private sector job growth nearly of 400,000 when you add in what's happened in the first 9 months of the Murphy administration. I don't believe it's a coincidence that putting more money in the hands of business owners led to more employment, and that when you took more money out of the hands of business owners, they employed fewer people. Now, I also, now that I'm not in elected office anymore, I don't have to fake the fact that I can't see anymore. So I'm going to put my glasses on. Used to only do that behind closed doors in my office at the State House, but now, who the hell cares? I'm going to wear them. What happens when you raise taxes, employment goes down, and people are unemployed? More people file for unemployment. What happens when you have a government that's so starved for revenue that they will steal money from anywhere? They steal money from places that they're not supposed to steal it from. So when I came into office in 2010, the unemployment insurance fund that we all pay into on a regular basis every 2 weeks, if you get a paycheck every 2 weeks, was $2 billion in debt. We had to borrow $2 billion from the federal government to pay the uninsurance claims of our citizens. What happened 8 years later? We paid off the $2 billion back to the federal government. We passed a constitutional amendment that said they can never steal from that fund again. And we left the current administration not with a $2 billion deficit in the fund to deal with, but a $2 billion surplus. $2 billion in surplus funds in case unemployment comes back, so that they have that $2 billion and growing to be able to take care of those people who need that help so desperately when they lose their job. And by the way, that led to another $400 million tax cut for businesses, because as the fund grew bigger, the tax that we needed to support the fund was able to be lowered by $400 million. There's been lots of talk about economic incentives and how god-awful they are. I find this fascinating. And the thing I find fascinating the most is that the Democrats in the legislature sit by and let the governor continue to say these things. Why am I surprised by that? Because the Economic Opportunity Act of 2013, which I plead guilty to signing into law, that enhanced tax incentives all over the state, but most particularly here in South Jersey, was sponsored by Democrats, was voted through a democratically controlled legislature, and was touted to me by the Democratic leadership of the state legislature. Now, if Republicans want to fight back and they want our future of our party to be strong, they cannot just sit by and be silent when a governor says that economic incentives are bad and it's the Republicans' fault. Well, I'll take my share of it. I signed it. But it was negotiated with, passed by, and voted for by an overwhelming majority of his own party, which obviously at that point he wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to, because otherwise you'd know. Now, when taxes are too high and people are unemployed, what you want to continue to do, because what I hear all the time and heard all the time when I was governor, and what Republicans always have to speak to, is the issue of affordability. So how do we make the state more affordable in a state that is extraordinarily expensive to live and work and raise your family? Well, the first thing we should do, and I thought one of the things we should do, is stop taxing people when they die. It's the ultimate insult, isn't it? Bad enough I'm dead. But once I die, you're taking my money that I earned when I was alive, and that, by the way, I paid you taxes on when I was alive. And now when I die, you want more of it. Well, in the years before I became governor, the estate tax not only was here, but grew and became the most expensive estate tax in America. $675,000 was the level of the exemption. Everything over that, at $675,001, we didn't just tax you on the dollar, we taxed you on all $675 once you had the temerity to be over $675. Now, if there's anybody in this audience that owns a house in New Jersey and has put away any money for their retirement, you're going to be over that $675. Given the cost of real estate, if you were smart and worked hard and paid off your mortgage in 30 years and found the time to also put some money aside for you to retire, you're over the $675, and if you die, they're coming for your money. The good news is not anymore, because the estate tax is gone. And that has already made more New Jerseyans stay here than would have stayed before. Not as many evacuating to Florida and North Carolina and South Carolina as we're doing before, not because they can't afford to live here, but because they can't afford to die here. Republicans need to talk about that. The Republican Party wants to have a future. We have to proudly stand up and say, We are the party that killed the death tax. It was our work that forced that to happen. We should talk about that. We reduced the sales tax so that everyday New Jerseyans who are buying things every day have to pay less sales tax to the state government. That helps everyday working New Jerseyans. And by the way, for those retirees, who I'm most offended by the way we tax them, because they paid taxes and all this money, then they saved money for their retirement, either through a 401k or an IRA or even through a pension that they get from their employer or from their union. If they made over $20,000 a year, we started taxing them on the income. Not anymore. If you can make now up to $100,000 a year from your retired income as a senior and not be taxed, what will that do? It'll allow more seniors to stay here, to keep more of the money that they already earned and, by the way, already paid taxes on. Republicans did that, and we should be standing up and talking about that. But at the same time, how did all those tax cuts come into effect? Because Republican governor made the largest investment in the Transportation Trust Fund in the state's history. Not a Democratic governor, a Republican governor. We never had a Transportation Trust Fund longer than 5 years. Now we have one that's 8 years. We never had one that was more than $1.6 billion. Now we have one that's $2 billion a year. And by the way, it's paid for. Because I think the people who use the roads and use the rails should pay for using them. And the people who come through our state as visitors should pay for the roads they drive onto. So when they stop to get gas in our state, they're going to pay a little bit more also. There are lots of people who argued about the gas tax, but let me just remind you something. It hadn't been increased in 26 years. And when you add up the estate tax elimination, the $100,000 exemption for seniors, the cut in the sales tax, we cut taxes by $200 million more than the gas tax went up. A net tax cut for the people of the state and better infrastructure, better roads. Maybe Route 55 will finally get done. Just as a pure pandering aside. Dr. Hushman talked about the expansion on this campus. Let me tell you why it happened. Because Republican governor said we have to invest in expanding our colleges and universities, expand what they can teach our children, modernize these places, and create more seats. 10,000 students to 19,000 students. That happens for two reasons. One, because you have created an attractive environment for students and their families to want to invest here and learn here. Secondly, you have the space for them. Because many of them may want to come, but if you don't have the space, you have no place to put them. You don't have classrooms, you don't have dormitories to put them. They can't come. $1.4 billion was invested by the taxpayers of New Jersey at the behest of a Republican governor. So when Democrats come back, as the current governor does, and says, oh gosh, all Christie did was cut spending and raise things on the backs of the middle class, and that's what Republicans do, baloney. We invested $1.4 billion to make college and university better and more affordable inside the state. And by the way, Jim Florio didn't do it, Jim McGreevey didn't do it, Dick Cody didn't do it, and John Corzine didn't do it. The last governor who did any investing in the public colleges and universities was Tom Kean. What a coincidence. Another Republican. Republicans want to have a future in this state, they have to remind the voters of that. When you walk into these buildings, I didn't ask Ali to name any of them after me, maybe I should have. But what I want you to remember is that that's the product of our party providing leadership to get that done. Didn't happen under the other party. A lot of talk about the budget too. That was an interesting time in Trenton. Let's just remind everybody, I inherited a budget with a $2 billion deficit that I had to fix in 5 months. I left the budget for my successor with a $500 million surplus. There was a lot of crying and complaining about a $500 million surplus. Can you only imagine if I had left him the $2 billion deficit that John Corzine had left me? There was all kinds of crying. And One other thing that Jack will understand more than anything else, and I'll try to make understandable to everybody else. The budget that I inherited had 13% one-shot revenues. What's that mean? Things that we sell, that we can only get revenue one time when you sell it. 13% of a $30 billion budget was made up of one-shot revenues, revenues that would never come back the next year. That's a structural deficit, everybody. The budget that I handed over to Governor Murphy, 2.8% in one-shot revenues, down from 13% when we came in. That's Republican leadership, saying that one-shot revenues are wrong, they're not fiscally responsible, and we should use them as little as we possibly can. I didn't hear a compliment for that from him as I left. In the 8 years before I came into office under Democratic leadership, state debt rose an average of 10% per year under Governors McGreevey, Cody, and Corzine. Debt increased in the next 8 years by 2% a year. From 10% a year to 2% a year. And by the way, a good amount of that debt was the debt I just spoke to you about that built the new buildings on this campus. That's a long-term investment, a smart investment that you can afford to make when you're not running up debt on everything else. But you're investing in you, in the young people that come to the state, the ones who live here, that we want to keep here, and the ones who come to Rowan from out of state, who we want to stay here. That's a smart way to make investment. Republicans should be proud of that they reduced debt from 10% a year to 2% a year. And they want to win elections again, they should start talking about it. On taxes as well, I'm proud to say, but I couldn't have done this without the Democratic legislature, so I have to give them credit too. I vetoed more tax increases than any Republican, any governor of either party in New Jersey history. Now, I couldn't have vetoed them if they hadn't passed them, so I have to give them credit for passing more tax increases than any legislature in New Jersey history, and then they allowed me to veto them. So you had no tax increases other than the gas tax increase I spoke about that was offset by those other tax cuts. What's happened in the last 9 months? Just the last 9 months? Now you're paying sales tax on everything you buy online. That's costing you $188 million a year to start. We increased the income tax. We now tax Airbnb. When you get on Uber and Lyft, you tax that. Now, I would just say that that's not a tax that the rich pay. I haven't seen a bunch of rich people take an Uber or Lyft. They generally have other ways to get around. That's taxing everyday New Jerseyans who are using that mode of transportation to get around, and lots of students who are using that transportation to get around because they don't have a car on campus. So they use Uber and they use Lyft, and it was never taxed before. It's taxed now, though. And we've had a corporate tax increase and a new tax on e-cigarettes. That's 6 new taxes for hundreds of millions of dollars in just 9 months, after 8 years of no net tax increases. Is that making New Jersey better or worse? Is that an argument that you want to make as a politician? Hey, I'm raising taxes because I know all of you believe that if you give us more money, we'll spend it responsibly. I know you do. You have great faith in us. There's 10,000 fewer state employees when I left office than when I walked in, with no layoffs. Discretionary spending was $2 billion less than when I walked in the door. Net, $2 billion less. What's discretionary spending? Discretionary spending is anything other than what you pay for pension, health care, and debt service. That's every other spending is $2 billion less. The only spending that went up during 8 years of Republican leadership was for pension, health care, and debt service. Remember that debt that we ran up 10% a year for the 8 years. That's a really bad thing. That's like, your roommate getting your credit card for the weekend. He gets drunk and you get the bill. In the 8 years that I was governor, state budgets increased total in 8 years by $5.2 billion, or 1.8% per year. What happened this year? Well, this year, state spending went up 8% in 1 year. 1.8% a year over 8 years. 8% in 1 year. By the way, as my mother used to remind me, when I would go out with her to the store as a kid and I'd ask to buy something, and she'd say, sure, yeah, you can buy that, great, yeah. I'm like, oh, my lucky day, I'm glad I came to the store with her. My brother and my sister, dumb, they didn't come. I'm smart, I came. She goes, yeah, listen, just go home, go in the backyard, pick the money off the money tree, and then come back with the money you can buy it. I said, well, we don't have a money tree in the backyard. She said, exactly. That 8% increase didn't come off a money tree. It came out of your pocket, and that's 1 year. It would take 4 years for our administration to do that. What do you want to argue to voters? That we're thrifty with your money and we spend less? Or that we're profligate with your money and we raise a budget 8% in 1 year? By the way, in an economy where inflation is 1%, we raise spending 8%. Kind of interesting. Property taxes, everybody loves property taxes. Everybody loves to talk about them. And in New Jersey, gosh, we're so proud that we're the most expensive property tax state in America, aren't we? And in the 10 years before I became governor, property taxes went up 70%. 70 in 10 years. Don DeFrancesco got one of those years. The rest of the years are, you remember now, McGreevey, Cody, Corzine. What happened in the 8 years after they left? Well, we passed the 2% property tax cap. And for the next 7 years after the cap was passed, property taxes went up 1.98% a year, under the 2% cap, or 13.8% total. That's an 80% reduction in the increases that happened for the 10 years before. You know what it saved taxpayers? $18.2 billion that they would have paid otherwise if taxes continued to rise at the same level they did before there was a cap. Do you think if they want to have a future in the Republican Party, we should talk about that? Seems to me that's something to talk about. And to tell you that maybe brighter days are not ahead. One of the ways we did that was a 2% cap on what public workers could get in terms of raises. Because if you're only going to increase revenue 2%, you can't raise expenses above 2%, and salaries are the biggest expense. We had a cap in place for 7 years. Current governor refuses to renew the cap. That cap alone saved $500 million in salary increases over 7 years. With the cap gone now, you're going to pay that $500 million. You didn't hear any of that in the talk about the bold new plan for the state's future economy. You also heard me criticized miserably during the campaign about having taken over Atlantic City. That I took over Atlantic City because I'm like some power-hungry guy who was confused. I didn't really want to be governor of New Jersey. What I always really pined for was to be mayor of Atlantic City. And the current governor said repeatedly in the campaign, when I get in day one, I remember watching one of the debates, day one, we're going to restore governance to the people of Atlantic City. I was sitting watching the debate going, yeah, you wait till you get in, bub. You see if you're going to restore governance to the people of Atlantic City. I should note that a number of the previous mayors in my lifetime, when given governance, used that governance to get themselves free federal housing in the federal prison system, because they were convicted of corruption. What did we do when we took over Atlantic City? Atlantic City had $303 million in debt to the casinos for having overcharged them for property taxes. They owed them $303 million. When we got in and we took over Atlantic City, we negotiated with the casinos and reduced that debt from $303 million to $138 million, a more than 50% reduction. And then we used the state's authority to bond, support those bonds, and pay the debt over the long course of time. What did that lead to? In 2017, and you're going to be jealous for the first time that you don't live in Atlantic City, we reduced property taxes by 11.5% in 2017. 11.5%. That meant the average homeowner in Atlantic City saw their property taxes go down $621. Can you imagine the joy in your household if that property tax bill had come in this August and you had seen it $621 lower than it was the year before. We would have had EMTs all over New Jersey, making special trips to homes all over New Jersey for men and women who are having heart attacks from the shock that their property tax has actually gone down. When I became governor, 6 casinos were closed in Atlantic City. After we took over Atlantic City, 3 new ones opened. And Moody's, just this week, raised Atlantic City's credit rating. Raised Atlantic City's credit rating. Can't help but laugh when I hear that. And when asked why they did, they said the sole reason is the state takeover. Now, you'll be shocked to know that in his bold new vision for the economy, the current governor has said, you know, on second thought, I think we'll keep this state takeover in place until 2021, but we'll do it more nicely than the previous governor did. I don't know, everybody. I wasn't worried about being nice. I was worried about getting the job done. And the job got done, and he's going to keep it in place. Isn't that amazing? I didn't just do this because I didn't know you were going to be here, Dana. But when I became governor, after 7 years as U.S. attorney, Camden was the deadliest city in America. In 2012, it was rated the deadliest, most violent city in the country. And so Dana and I got together and said, this is unacceptable. And if a Republican and Democrat can agree to do some things, maybe we can make a difference. It took a lot of guts for a Democratic mayor of Camden to fire the entire police force, but damn, she did it. And I said, you do it, I'll pay for it. And we did. And we established a whole new police force that put 400 new police officers on the street in Camden with a whole new attitude. And what's happened since 2012 when we did that? Well, murders are down 66% in the city of Camden since we did that. They're not calling them the deadliest anything anymore. Robberies are down 46%. Non-fatal shootings are down 50% in Camden since we took over, together with the county, the policing of the city of Camden. We didn't just stop there. Then we got together after 2012, and in 2013, we said we got to do something about the schools because it is unacceptable that children in Camden can't get a good education. And in the 5 years since we've been working together to improve the schools, what's happened? Well, the graduation rate went from 49% to 70%. And the dropout rate was cut from 21% to 12%. And those economic incentives, those evil, evil economic incentives that you've heard over and over again are terrible, awful things, giveaways to the rich. Well, I'd like the new governor to tell that to the 2,000 people in the city of Camden who are now employed by those new businesses that have come into Camden because of those economic incentives, and the 1,000 more that will be employed over the course of the next 2 years as more businesses are building and coming into Camden. We no longer have a prison on the waterfront in Camden. We have American water. We no longer have a prison on the waterfront in Camden. We're going to have a beautiful office building and apartments where people can look out from Camden onto the skyline of Philadelphia. And when they walk out of that building, they're not going to have to worry about being shot. And if they bring their children into that building, their children can walk to school without worried about being assailed. And when they walk into that school building, they're going to be able to get an education. Now, if I were a Republican candidate in New Jersey, I'd be talking about that. Especially given that as a Republican, you can swing a dead cat by the tail for miles in Camden and not hit a Republican. Not even close. So the idea that our party doesn't care about the disadvantaged, that our party doesn't care about minorities, that our party doesn't care about cities, we just proved it to you in 2 of the biggest cities in this state, Atlantic City and Camden. And because I'm in South Jersey, I'm not even going to talk about Newark, because I didn't even know Newark was in the state. So I'm down here. And let's just talk about crime in general. In the 8 years before I became governor, crime went up over 10% across the state. In the 8 years that they made a former U.S. attorney bring Republican values to a governorship, crime went down statewide 25%. And we didn't do it just by locking people up. In fact, the opposite. We put in criminal justice reform and bail reform that has allowed us to close 2 state prisons. Go to any other state in this country where they're closing state prisons. In most other states, they're building them. In New Jersey, we're closing them. And we're focused on getting people the help they need to re-enter society and become taxpayers. Republicans should be talking about that. If we want a future as a party, we should be talking about the fact that we care and believe that every life is precious, even the life that's gone astray and wound up in jail. That life needs to be taken care of. We now have the toughest limit on opioid prescriptions in the country. And what's happened in the first year of that law? 28% fewer pills have been prescribed in this state. What's that amount to, just so you know what we're talking about here? That amounts to 3 million fewer pills on the streets of New Jersey than before we passed the law. Undoubtedly, fewer people will become addicted because fewer pills are available. Republicans should talk about the fact that we care about people who suffer from the disease of drug addiction, that we recognize that as a disease, and they need to be helped and treated. And that when 3,000 New Jerseyans die from drug overdose, that's unacceptable to us as a people and as a party. And that we're the ones who actually did something about it. Maybe we should talk about that if we want to have a future of a Republican Party in this state. And lastly, just remember something when they talk about the pension. I didn't fix the pension. Pension still needs a lot of work. But I'll tell you this, it's a hell of a lot better today than it was when I got here. In our 8 years, we put $8.8 billion in cash into the pension system. That's 2.5 times more than the 5 previous governors combined. Hear that again. 2.5 times more than the 5 previous governors combined. And our investment strategies, which were so excoriated by our newest Wizard of Wall Street governor. We created a system that had 90% less risk than any other public system in the country, that outperformed 75% of the public systems in the country, and when we left office, the market value of the pension was $10 billion higher than it was when we walked in, after having paid out $70 billion in benefits. Change it if you want, but if you're a Republican, you should be standing up and saying, I took less risk, made more money, and left more money in there than when I walked in, even while paying every pensioner exactly what they were owed every day of the 8 years. So for the people who sit out in this audience who are listening further beyond, who said, Christie took my pension, I would love them to write the note back to me now to thank me for their pension check every date that it was due in the full amount that was due, and that their pension system has $10 billion more today than it did when I walked in. Haven't gotten that thank you note yet from the teachers union, but I'm anxiously awaiting it. I run to the mailbox every day expecting it'll come. You don't hear any of that conversation. In fact, you hear no conversation about pensions now, do you? And the reason you don't is because there are no easy answers. Republicans, if they want a future, need to be the party of giving the hard answers. See, if our party wants to have a future, especially in this state, it's time to speak up. The governor's had almost a year now. He's passed his first budget, passed a bunch of really interesting legislation, signed it into law. It's his state now. I'm still a citizen here, but it's his state now. And now we begin to judge, not on promises, but on what you deliver. Not on how you sound, but on what you do. And I would just tell you that I said this to the governor-elect when he was governor-elect. This job's a lot harder from the inside than it looks from the outside. So just be careful. Fooled me too. Fooled me too. It's a lot harder from the inside than it is from the outside. So the future of the Republican Party in New Jersey, by the way, just so we can end with historical facts and then I'll take your questions. Just remember something. In the last 40 years in this blue state, there has not been one two-term Democratic governor. Not one. There's been 3 two-term Republican governors. Tom Kean, Christie Whitman, and me. Not one two-term Democrat. Why do you think that is? This is what should be encouraging for young, middle-aged, and old Republicans like me and Collins. What happens is, well, shit, Jack, if I'm old, you're old, pal. Here's what happens. Democrats raise taxes, increase spending, make government bigger, mismanage it, waste your money, and you go, I can't deal with this. Give me a Republican who's not going to do that. And the Republican doesn't do that for 4 years, and you go, oh, great. They didn't do that for 4 years. By the way, the two biggest wins, percentage-wise, by a Republican in state history came in the last 40 years. Tom Kean was 69% in 1985, and me was 61% in 2013. That didn't happen by accident. We get reelected because we actually did what we said we were going to do. But then after 8 years of us saying no to all of you, no, we can't do this, no, we can't spend on that, no, we can't do, no. You go, oh gosh, I'm so tired of saying no. Can we please elect someone who will say yes? And you forget that when they say yes, they're saying yes with your money. And after 4 years of watching that, you go, oh damn, man, I forgot. Now I remember. Get those damn Republicans back in here and clean this up. Tom Kean did it for 8 years, and then we got Jim Florio and we forgot. And then Christie Whitman came. Got Christie Whitman for 8 years, then we really forgot, and we got Jim McGreevey. And I love Jim. We get along great, but I said to him, anybody who says Jim McGreevey was an ineffective governor, by the way, is totally wrong. I spent 8 years still trying to clean up the stuff he had done 8 years earlier. Man, he was only in for 2.5 years. I mean, he was deadly effective, McGreevey. Deadly effective in 2.5 years. But when McGreevey left office, it gave the Democrats a reprieve, a new shot to hit the reset button. So you got John Corzine. Jim McGreevey would have never been reelected, ever. And that's why he quit, because he never would have been reelected. He kicked himself out before they could do to him what he did to Bob Torricelli. Kicked him out because he wasn't going to win. Democrats, by the way, are much better than that than Republicans. We let our really bad candidates hang around, and then we let Democrats beat them. It's not good. But then, after 4 years of John Corzine, increased taxes, increased spending, ineffective, weak leadership. They picked me and reelected me. And now we're going to watch. Will history repeat itself? If the future of the Republican Party wants to be a bright, bold, innovative, successful future, then get on the ball. Start working now. The time to be quiet is over. The victory lap is done. And believe me, we are seeing, are we not, that the job's a lot harder from the inside than it looked from the outside. So it's time for every Republican who cares about this and wants the future of the party to fight for it. We're always going to have to work with Democrats. There's too many Democrats in this state not to work with them. They just need our help. They're not bad people. They just can't be trusted all alone by themselves. Because when they're all alone by themselves, they not only get things wrong, but they can't even get along with each other. They fight with each other. They can't agree on anything. You read the papers. Man, these guys are killing each other. Me, Sweetie, and Oliver look like, a love fest compared to what's going on down there now. Republicans bring a different point of view that's needed in this state, but the voters won't know it unless we speak it. Now, it's not going to be me who's going to be speaking it by myself, or even primarily. As Mary Pat reminds me all the time, I have given at the office. It was 16 years of public service. 8 years as U.S. Attorney, 8 years as governor. And I loved every minute of it. But we need some new people to come forward and to speak these truths. Because I guarantee you, there's not one thing in here tonight that isn't the absolute truth. They'll try to dissuade it by going, yeah, but this and but that, but, yeah. We all know if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, every day would be Christmas. But it's not. And you know what? New Jersey does want a little edge to it. I've always said, this is an edgy state. It's a state with a chip on its shoulder. We're stuck between Philadelphia and New York. Benjamin Franklin said, a keg tapped at both ends. Right? Man, New Jersey isn't famous around the world for being sweet. New Jerseyans are the people you call in when the tough job needs to be done. When the bad times come. And you need edgy, strong, courageous people who are willing to fight. That's what our party has been when we win. And when we lose, we're the party who's apologizing for things that we never should have apologized for in the first place. Well, I never apologized for 8 years for the things we did. And I won't apologize in retirement, if this is what you call this. Because I love people coming to me, how are you enjoying your retirement? I'm like, man, I got 2 kids who still have to go to college. Retirement, like I won't be retired for a hell of a long time. But for political retirement, this is what we need to do. We need to get somebody to come in and substitute. And talk about these things. We shouldn't run away from them. We should be proud of them. And if we are proud of them, doesn't mean we're going to win, but it gives us a chance. All you need to be is in the game. You don't get any other guarantees otherwise. So I'm glad to have the chance to come down here to Rowan to be able to talk about these things, about the future of my party. And you always know from watching me for 8 years, what I enjoy much more is taking your questions. I will remind you, of course, because I'm able to remind you this for a long time. I'm happy to take any questions. And I'm even happy to take questions from people who disagree with me. And if you disagree in a kind and respectful way, I will disagree back with you in a kind and respectful way. Just because I've been out of practice for 9 months doesn't mean the muscles still don't work. So you decide with all these cameras here tonight and all these people you want to make yourself famous, don't worry, I'll make you famous. I guarantee you that, all right? Thank you all very much for having me tonight. I appreciate it.
Okay, let me just get this on. We do have some questions that have been submitted. We've tried to cull through them. They ranged all over, both national and, and state. So
let me have it, Ben. Let's go.
We'll start slow. As governor, you were able to work with Democrats on a multitude of issues. Do you think your style of bipartisan politics is still possible in the current national political environment?
Sure. I think it is. I think, you know, I think the president kind of has it half right at the moment. You have to be tough. And I don't think anybody ever misinterpreted my style for being like kind and genteel. And a lot of journalists and editorial page writers said, well, if you're that tough, you can't possibly make deals with people because, you know, you got to be nice to people to make deals with them. No, you don't. You have to have power to make deals with people. And I think the president, as you've seen with some of the trade deals, I'd suggest, with other countries, has played it very tough and then made a deal. Very tough with Mexico, now we have a deal with Mexico. Very tough with Canada, now we have a deal with Canada. Very tough with South Korea, now we have a deal with South Korea. And we're going to have one with the EU, and we're going to have one with China, ultimately. So I do think it's possible, Ben, but you have to show them that you have the toughness that the president has now shown that he has, but he has to show the other side, too. You have to be willing to give them some things that you don't want to give them. I mean, yeah, I didn't want to give an increase in the gas tax, but I also wanted to get these other taxes cut. So if you're dealing with people on their side, you got to give some things that you wouldn't necessarily want to give in a perfect world in order to get some things that you know they don't want to give you. And I think that style can still work, but the toughness has to be part of it. They have to know they can't run you over.
The next question, we had a bunch of questions about the president.
I can't imagine.
You think?
He's such a low-key figure in the world, isn't he?
Well, let's start with this one.
All right.
Do you think the president, Donald Trump, is susceptible to a Republican challenger in 2020? And if so, who would make the strongest Republican challenger?
No chance. I mean, it's amazing to me, but he's the most popular Republican president with the Republican Party that I've seen probably since Bush 41 after the Gulf War. It's extraordinary. And I think if he decides to run, which it looks like he is, it's a fool's errand for any Republican to challenge him in a primary. He'll win. He'll win a primary.
So another one that came in from a Rowan student, has your perception of Donald Trump changed in any way since you endorsed him in 2016?
No, not a bit. I've known him for 16 years. He's exactly the same person he was when I met him 16 years ago. I wish he'd change a little, but he doesn't. He doesn't. He hasn't changed, and I don't think he will change. He's now, 73 years old, I think, 71 years old. Oh, God, he'll kill me. Made him 73. At 71 years old, he's not changing. And he hasn't changed a bit since I met him.
But there are ways you would wish he would change?
Sure.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I wish he wouldn't tweet so much. I mean, and change some of the stuff that he does tweet, because I think it distracts from his successes. I tell him all the time, I think he steps on his own story. And I wish he wouldn't. He disagrees, obviously. I mean, the good thing about the president is he always listens to my advice and then he disposes of much of it. But he always listens, so that's good. And sometimes he follows it. Most of the time he follows his own.
Why are you not in the Trump administration?
Because I don't want to be.
Was it a position that you would have wanted to be, though?
Hell, I would have taken vice president. But, I've been offered Secretary of Labor twice. I've been offered Secretary of Homeland Security. And I'm not interested in those jobs. Hey, listen, Ben, I mean it. 16 years of doing this is a long time. And it's not that I was like worn out. As you could probably tell, I'm not worn out. But what I will tell you, though, is that, I do have some practical things to attend to. I'm not kidding. I got 2 more kids to put through college. And the first 2 kids I put through Princeton and Notre Dame while I was governor. What that means is that whatever money we had saved before is gone. It's now in the coffers of Princeton and Notre Dame. But I got some great shirts out of it, so that's good. And I don't need another title. If I were to go back into government, it would be only for something that I felt like I was uniquely qualified to do, where I thought I could make a big enough difference that I could look at my wife and say, okay, one more time. She sacrificed a lot over the last 16 years, as have my children. And so there might be something the president could offer me that I would take, but it hasn't happened yet.
So then the question lends itself to the next question, which is, are you uniquely qualified and can make a big enough difference by running for president in 8 years? Is that
8 years?
Well, you said no one's going to challenge this.
Yeah, no, listen, it's just so long from now. I mean, listen, I don't see a path right now for me to run for president. Like, Ben, I'm not going to be like Rick Santorum. Like, I'm not just going to run like, oh, I'm not going to win, but what the heck, it's kind of fun, and let's go. Or Mike Huckabee. Like, I'd watch those guys when I was running. I'm like, how do you get out of bed every morning? You have no chance. 0 chance. What are you doing in the Des Moines Marriott if you have no chance, right? What are you doing in Manchester and Nashua if you have no chance? So the only way I'd ever run for president again is if I saw a path to win. I don't want to do it just for the exercise. I enjoyed it when I did it, and I feel like I made a difference in the race, but I wouldn't do it just for that. The only way I'd ever run again is if I saw a path to winning, and right now I don't see a path to winning.
One of the questions that came up in the cards that were submitted was you to reflect back on your run for president. What did you learn from that experience?
Well, a bunch of things. Like, one, I learned that it's an amazing honor to even get a chance to run.
So then Santorum should be praised.
Oh, no, he ran more than once.
Okay.
First time, yeah, Ben. But, it's an amazing honor to get a chance to run when you have a chance to win. And I will tell you, there were any number of times where I was staying in Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina, where I spent most of my time in those three states, where, you'd be standing up for a town hall meeting and doing the Pledge of Allegiance and looking around at people holding Christie for President signs and saying to yourself, how did I get here? And what an incredible moment to have the opportunity to run for President of the United States and legitimately have a chance to win. So I learned that just the activity of it is an extraordinary honor. I learned that there's certain things in politics, no matter how good you might be at it, that you can't change. And so in that race in 2016, I was supposed to be running as the blunt, direct, no-nonsense guy who was going to wrestle Washington into doing what they needed to do.
Tell it like it is.
Right, telling it like it is. Good plan. It's obviously what people wanted, except the guy who was on The Apprentice for 10 years decided that's what he wanted to do. And not only did he have 100% name ID, but he also had unlimited money. I will tell you that when we were in second place in New Hampshire, beginning of January, when we had gotten the Manchester Union Leader endorsement and the Boston Herald endorsement, and we were in second place behind Donald Trump in New Hampshire, we did a poll up there. And we asked Trump voters, who's your second choice? 38% of them said I was their second choice. The next closest was 9%. Now, when you see that, that's the ultimate good news and bad news. Good news is those people really like you. Bad news is unless he gets out, you're not winning. And that's really what it was. And one anecdote, Mary Pat did a lot of going door to door in New Hampshire. And she would go up and introduce herself. Hi, I'm Mary Pat Christie. I'm married to Governor Christie. And they go, oh, gosh, we love your husband. God, he's so smart and direct and blunt. We love him. I mean, we were voting for Trump, but we love your husband. And Mary Pat goes, well, if you love my husband, why are you voting for Trump? They go, yeah, we just don't need another politician. So what I learned was there are certain things in a race that you can't change. No matter how well you do. I was in 9 presidential debates. In every one of them, I was rated in the top 3 of the 10 people who were up there. In every one of them. It didn't matter, Ben, because the guy who was in my lane had a really big truck. And he was blocking any way for me to get around him. So what you learn, too, is that there's certain things, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how good your plan is, no matter how the times are ready for your type of leadership, if someone else is there that is just a little bit different or better in certain ways, there's nothing you can do about it. So that's why people ask me if I have any regrets. I really don't. I did that campaign exactly the way I would have wanted to do it, and I really believe, and I've said this before, that if Donald Trump hadn't been in the race, I think I'd be president. But, he was in the race. So I'm at Rowan. Not all bad.
Ironic in its own way.
Not all bad.
There were several questions relating to the upcoming November elections. As a private citizen who watches all of this, can you offer some predictions both in the state and nationally?
Sure. And don't forget that I'll be on the best election coverage on election night on ABC News with my buddy George Stephanopoulos. And if you want to hear all this stuff, you can watch then. I have to do that. It's part of my contract. But what do I think is going to happen? I think Republicans will retain the Senate. And my guess is that they'll probably gain 2 to 4 seats, somewhere in that range. I think the House is a likely loser for the Republicans. Now, the interesting part about that's changed in the last couple of weeks is that the generic ballot for the House races is basically plus 10, plus 11 Democrat. But if you look at the 66 districts that everyone identifies as kind of swing districts, it's just plus 1 Democrat. So something's happened in the last few weeks. I think it's mostly been the Kavanaugh situation that changed it, that energized Republican voters in a way that they weren't energized before. And I still don't think they have as much energy as the Democratic voters, but they're much closer. They've closed that gap. So I think I think election night could be closer in the House than I would have suspected 2 weeks ago. But gun to my head, if I had to guess, I'd say it's probably a Democratic win of the House.
Do you have any predictions on some? We have several competitive House races here in New Jersey.
Yeah, I think of the competitive races, I think MacArthur wins, I think Lance wins, and I think the Weber-Sherrill race is a toss-up. And it could go either way, which is pretty amazing given the contours of that district. That's my district. That's a very Republican district, and the fact that it's competitive tells you a lot about the varying levels of energy of the voters. So I think the Weber-Sherrill race is a toss-up. I think MacArthur and Lance will survive. And I think Jeff Van Drew will win in District 2.
We had one question came sort of a bit out of left field, but I think it's actually really intriguing. What are you currently reading? And what would you recommend to be on the reading list for any concerned American citizen?
Well, I just finished The Soul of America by John Meacham. And I like John a lot. I've gotten to know him over the years, and I think it's a book that I'd recommend to any of you who are despondent over the condition of our country. It reminds us how great this country is. And he talks about the problems in the book too, but he reminds us of what a great country is. So that's what I just finished reading. Before that, I read Grant. I started that the day I got out of office.
The Chernow?
The Chernow biography of Grant. It's 900 pages. I was carrying that thing around like I had 3 bricks in my briefcase for months. And I finally, in May, just said, like, I have to finish this book in the next 2 weeks because I can't stand carrying it around anymore. I know more about Ulysses S. Grant than I ever wanted to know in my life. If you buy that book, it is a commitment. It is a commitment to knowing every little thing about U.S. Grant and his family that you ever wanted to know. I'm happy I read it. I feel like it's an accomplishment. It's like going on a diet for a little while, for me especially. So, Grant was another book that if you have the interest and you have the stamina, I'd recommend too. It's very well written, but it's a lot.
One of the questions that came from the audience had to do with the fights within the Republican Party between self-described moderates, self-described conservatives, the various segmentation of the party, who's got power. The question specifically was, do political moderates such as yourself, and that questions whether you would define yourself as a political moderate, but do political moderates have a future in the Republican Party and in American politics as a whole? Or are we becoming too divided and too extreme in both parties?
Well, I think you can apply that to both parties, right? I mean, there doesn't seem a whole lot of space for people in the middle in either party right now. And I think if you watched the Kavanaugh hearings, you could see that starkly. That you got to be way out there on both sides to get heard. And I think that's a problem for the country as a whole. I think that the biggest cause of this over the years, Ben, and now we're going to get kind of wonky, so Ben's going to really love this part, has been gerrymandering. Because the House of Representatives now is a house of Republican districts versus Democratic districts, and almost no real swing districts anymore. So if you're a member of the House of Representatives, all you care about is surviving your primary. Because most of the time, if you survive your primary, you're gonna be returned to the House. Well, when that happens in this country, people get self-interested. They like being called congressman or congresswoman, and they want to keep the title. And they do what they need to do that. And I think dealing with the gerrymandering issue is foundational to restoring some middle ground in the country politically. Because right now, except for in the Senate on occasion, and you see people like Susan Collins and Joe Manchin, to use one from each party, that are middle road people, right? We'll see. And in this state, I mean, you talk about I remember no 2-term Democratic governors for 40 years. We haven't had a Republican elected to the U.S. Senate in 46. It's the longest streak of any state in America. California's elected a Republican more recently than us. New York's elected a Republican more recently than us. So, that kind of polarization, I think, is not helpful.
You talked about the House races. I want to just jump back. You care to comment on the Hugen-Menendez race and how you think that'll end up?
I legitimately don't know, because I think, Ben, that's going to be so dependent upon turnout. I mean, let's face it, Bob Menendez, just by the numbers, this isn't my judgment, this is the judgment of every poll I've seen, is the most unpopular person ever to run for statewide office. I mean, those numbers are dreadful. 20, 25 points upside down on fave, unfave. It's incredible. But it also tells you how Democrat the state's become, because even with ratings that are that upside down, he's still winning in most polls. So people are going, we really don't like him, but we'll vote for him. That usually doesn't happen. So I don't know, like, who shows up on the 6th in New Jersey. And if they show up, if a lot of Democrats show up, which I think they will, to vote in these House races, will they just skip the Senate spot and not vote? Just skip over that line. Because I'll tell you something, like, I've done a lot of driving around New Jersey now, and now I have to actually pay attention. Because like before I was getting driven, so I was reading, I'm talking on the phone, I'm not paying attention to what's going on. Now I can actually look. You'll be relieved to know. And this is something I've noticed. I've seen tons of Democrat House candidate signs up in my neck of the woods in particular. Malinowski, Mikey Sherrill, Andy Kim. But I've seen almost no Menendez signs on lawns. I mean, I've seen them on the side of the road and stuff, but I've seen almost no Menendez signs. Like, you have people who have on their lawn, I'll drive through a neighborhood, and they'll have like a Malinowski sign and a sign which looks to me to be a blue sign with some names that I don't recognize. There's probably the local municipal candidates in that town, but you don't see a Menendez sign on that lawn. But on the Republican lawns, you'll see a Lance sign and a Hugen sign. You'll see a Weber sign and a Hugen sign. So I'm beginning to, it's anecdotal, and signs don't vote, because as we know, Jack, if signs voted, Carrie Edwards, may he rest in peace, would have been a 2-term governor. You have to be really old to get that joke, but it's really very good. Go back to some old people that were around then. You'll laugh like hell at that joke. But it, so I don't want to make too much of that.
Okay.
But I do think that there's something anecdotally going on where Democrats don't want to say they're for Menendez. They don't want people to know they're for Menendez because they feel as if, given all the things that have happened with him, that it's a little embarrassing.
Want to jump back to Donald Trump in just a couple more minutes that we have here.
Sure.
One of the questions asked about, you said you wish he wouldn't tweet as much.
Yeah.
Beyond that, what advice would you be giving to the president?
Well, listen, I'm fortunate enough that I give advice to the president all the time, and my general rule is I don't tell people what advice I give to the president, because if I do, then I won't be able to give advice to the president anymore. Because he'll go, what the hell are you telling them what you're telling me? And that's exactly what he would say, and say, I'm not talking to you anymore. So I generally don't talk about the advice I give them. But I'll reiterate what I said before, which is that I'm fortunate that given our relationship over 16 years, he always listens. I think there's a myth about Donald Trump that he doesn't listen. And he does. Now, he talks more than he listens, but that's, you could say, for about most politicians. He may be to an extreme, but he listens. And there have been times where I've been able to persuade him. And I don't want to lose the ability to do that. And by talking about what I try to persuade him on, I'd probably lose the ability to do it. So I'm going to keep that in reserve for the good of the country.
Getting back to New Jersey, I'm combining a couple questions here. Given the record that you spoke about in your remarks, why did the public give Phil Murphy, a candidate who openly said he was going to raise more than $1 billion in taxes, such a strong victory?
Because they were tired of Republicans and tired of me. I mean, it's not hard to figure out. Like, listen, Tom Kean, the blessed sainted Tom Kean, we must all, when we say it, do this, right? We all love Governor Kean. But remember something. After 8 years of Tom Kean, Jim Florio got 60% of the vote. You can't think of a more opposite person from a personality and policy perspective from Tom Kean than Jim Florio. Yet he got 60% of the vote. Is that because Kean was unpopular? No. It's because this is a Democrat state that flirts with Republicans, but after being married to us for 8 years, they go, yeah, we'll take a divorce. We need a break. And I think that's all it was. I don't think it was Kim Guadagno's fault. I think Kim was a good candidate. I think she worked really hard. She tried very hard. I think she put out some really good ideas. I don't think it would have mattered. I think that it's a Democrat state, and after 8 years of a Republican governor, they just went, okay, enough. We want to go back to the Democrats. The interesting moment will be 3 years from now. after 4 years of the person you described in your question, I didn't describe him that way, you did, will that wear well? You know, what do the people, let's just use one example. What do the people of New Jersey want? Do they want a governor who says, get the hell off the beach? Or do they want a governor who says, pretty please, get off the beach? I don't know. I've lived here a long time. You know which one I think they want.
In the final question here, and I'll let you offer any concluding remarks at that point. Who are the up-and-coming Republicans? You talked about the next generation. So who are the up-and-coming Republicans that we should be paying attention to, both in the state and nationally?
Well, in the state, listen, I think if you mean up-and-coming, like up-and-coming for statewide office inside the state, you know, I think that somebody like Tom MacArthur is a guy who, yeah, no, I'll get to you, Jack, don't worry. I think Tom MacArthur is a guy who has a real future, probably statewide in the party. I think Weber, if he wins this race, has a potential future statewide in the party. I think John Bramnick has a potential statewide for the party inside the state. And I think that there will be more people who will now emerge in the opposition in the legislature who we don't yet know about because they're still getting their sea legs underneath them. And we have to see what happens in the midterms in 19, and do we elect some new people that will come in and be really effective opposition to Governor Murphy and the Democrats in the legislature. On the national scene, you know, it's kind of hard to tell right now, right? Because like Trump is like a solar eclipse, right? Like you can't really see anything else in the Republican Party. You really can't nationally, right? I mean, it's like, it's Trump and then everybody else. You know, there were 17 of us who ran. And the future of the party was determined by that race. Trump is the future of the party for the next 6 years. Even whether he's reelected or not, he will hang over, even if he were to be defeated for reelection, he'll hang over the next primary and be an influence over the next primary. So I think it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, there are some good young people, you know, on the national level. I find most of them as governors, and that's kind of my bias, right? But I think,
who are you talking about, though?
Well, like Larry Hogan in Maryland. I mean, think about this. Maryland, he's got a 76% job approval rating as a Republican in Maryland. Let me just give you context on this, because Hogan will be reelected in 2.5 weeks, and he will be only the second Republican to ever be reelected governor of Maryland in the 242-year history of Maryland. Only the second. That's the kind of thing that makes you a national star. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts. Again, nationally, blue state Republicans tend to do okay because people go, wow, look at them, especially in today's atmosphere. They can work with the other side. They can get things done. They can get votes. Think about poor Charlie Baker. He's sitting up there with a 71% job approval thinking, I've got to be the most popular Republican governor in America with a 71% job approval in Massachusetts. He just has to look down I-95 and he sees Hogan's beating him by 5 points. Those are two people to keep an eye on, right? I would also keep an eye on some of the folks who may win governorships on both parties in 18. I think the Republicans will lose some governorships. I mean, we're at 34 Republican governorships right now. It's the most Republican governors we've had in the history of the country. It's 34 Republicans, 15 Democrats, and an independent. We'll lose some. We're just going to have to lose some of those. You're not going to be able to stay at that level. But watch the people who win on Election Day to see who the future is going to be. And you didn't ask, but I'll give you one candidate on the Democratic side for president in 2020 who I think everybody should keep an eye on. And this will probably be the death knell of this poor guy because I actually, you know, said something nice about him. But watch out for Deval Patrick. Deval Patrick, for those of you who don't know, is the former two-term governor, Democratic governor of Massachusetts. My theory about 2020, Ben, is that no person whose business address is Washington, D.C. will be able to beat Donald Trump. Donald Trump has made the American people so angry at Washington that they're just going to look, any United States senator, and there's a bunch of them who want to run, including one of our own, they can't win, in my view. Trump will say they're part of the problem. This is what you sent me down here to fix. Don't turn this country back over to them, because it'll just be the same old Washington stuff. With me, you know that I won't put up with this Washington stuff. Trump will be more challenged if he runs against someone who has executive experience, so he takes that argument away, and is outside of Washington and never been in Washington. He's going to be able to say, well, I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. President, but I did, if it was Deval, all I know is that I created jobs in Boston. I created jobs all across Western Massachusetts. I balanced budgets. I dealt with natural disasters. Like, I think somebody like, and Patrick is very articulate and very bright. So I think, if the Democrats are smart, they're going to look to somebody like that and not a creature of Washington, D.C. If they nominate someone like Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden, and by the way, listen,
Cory Booker.
Or Cory Booker. Listen, I told Cory this, so I'm not telling you all anything. I've told Cory. But Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden and I went to the same college, just a little bit south of here, across the Delaware Memorial Bridge. So we're both fighting blue hens. And I like Joe on a personal level. We've always gotten along really well personally. But this is how crazy politics is today. Like, people are viewing Joe Biden as a stabilizing force. Joe Biden! The people he used to be called Crazy Uncle Joe. He's the guy who said Barack Obama was the first real African-American candidate for president because he was clean. He said that. Like, he's the guy who said, passing Obamacare was a big effing deal, like right into the microphone. Like, Joe says crazy stuff. And everybody's forgotten that because, like, they go, wow, look at Trump. Joe's a stabilizing force. Don't be fooled, man. Joe gets out there on that stage with Trump, it's going to be crazy. And not good for the Democrats, I suspect, because anybody who tries to play this game with Donald Trump always loses. Look at every Republican in our primary who tried to go after him and be personally negative and tough in that way. They got killed, right? I mean, Rand Paul tried it first, and he dismissed him. Then Marco does the bit with the small hands, and you wet your pants and all this stuff. He crushed him. Cruz got on him about this stuff. He killed Cruz. Kasich started whining and moaning. He killed him. He's like this force from Queens that knows how to do this better than anybody I've ever seen. And so what they need is an antidote to that. If they try to get somebody who's going to play that game with him, he will play that game and he will beat them like he owns them. He needs somebody, they need a contrast. They need a real serious contrast, in my view, with executive experience. And that means, to me, either somebody like Deval Patrick or Mayor Landrieu of New Orleans, or one of the new governors that's going to get elected here in 2018 who's going to go, oh, the mansion looks nice. Can I go to Washington? And is going to get right on the train to head. It could be somebody like Gavin Newsom or other folks who decide that they want to run for president right away because they see an opening. So that's the way I look at both the future of our party and the future of what's going to happen in 2020. I think it'll be a very interesting race because any race with Donald Trump in it will be interesting. But I also think that the Democrats seem to me to be like kind of inching towards a trap with all these Washington folk who are looking to run for president. They nominate one of those, I think it's going to be very, very tough. Nothing's impossible. We nominated Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton last time. Anything's possible. Anything's possible. But I think it would be less likely for the Democrats to win if they nominate a creature of Washington.
Having all these predictions from Governor Christie just means that we're going to have to invite you back to see whether you were right on any of this stuff.
And that's a great thing, guys, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for having me.
I want to thank everybody. Appreciate it. The governor's going to be taking off. You need to walk him out.